So there is a rising concern I've personally noticed that many people may not care about when it comes to the old school console Pokemon games and then being on Nintendo's online service. You see, back in the day, there were various ways that these console games could interact with the mainline handheld games of the time. With the N64 games, Pokemon Stadium and Pokemon Stadium 2, with Pokemon Stadium, they would give you this adapter pack that you could plug into the back of your Nintendo 64 controller. And then you could plug in a cartridge of Pokemon Yellow, Blue, or Red, or potentially Green if you were in Japan, and use that game in various ways within Pokemon Stadium. Silver and Gold were also used when it comes up with Pokemon Stadium 2. And I know in some games, if you had a corresponding Pokemon, that Pokemon could participate in the mini games in those two games. So that's a very interesting feature. That's really cool. But then in Pokemon Colosseum and Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness for the GameCube, things were a little harder because you had to have the Game Boy Advance, right? The actual system. But then you had to have the game. But you also had to have a Game Boy to GameCube link cable. So a lot of peripherals going on here in order to use your handheld games in tandem with these console games on the GameCube. But it was really cool because you got to battle with your team in the section of Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness and in Colosseum, in which you could fight your friends. And of course, you could use them, I believe, in the story of those two games as well. But then, too, you could also transfer Pokemon out of those two games into the base game. So a lot of interchanging hands going around here with those two GameCube games. And I think that was really cool back in the day. However, now there isn't a way to do that because the classic games from Generation 1 and 2 aren't available on Nintendo's online service. Therefore, they can't even interact with Pokemon Home, and therefore they can't interact with the console games releasing on Nintendo's online service. So I wonder if this is going to be rectified in the future, because without these games being present, there's no interactivity that can be had between the Game Boy games and the games that were on the N64, nor can there be any interactivity between the two GameCube games and the Game Boy Advance games. So therefore, you could say that these four games are releasing in a semi-broken state because features are missing now because the necessary components aren't there, which is a very sad state to be in, honestly. So I do hope that there's some way to rectify this issue in the future. Maybe all three generations that correspond with these four games will be released on NSO as well, seeing as how we do have Game Boy games available and we do have Game Boy Advance games available. But now, in talking about games that have a dependency on the handheld series in order to function, in the Wii era, we do have Pokemon Battle Revolution and My Pokemon Ranch. Now, Pokemon Battle Revolution was a full-fledged game and one of the first console games for Nintendo to have online functionality, but it did depend on Pokemon Diamond and Pokemon Pearl. Because even though, like in Stadium and Stadium 2, you could have rental teams, it was funner to play with teams that you had raised in the handheld games of Diamond and Pearl in order to fight the various challenges in Pokemon Battle Revolution. And it was funner to fight online with teams that you have cultivated in the handheld titles. However, too, with My Pokemon Ranch, it was a WiiWare game, and that's a whole nother conversation. We don't know how WiiWare games are going to be handled on NSO, but still, unlike, say, Pokemon storage games of the past and future, meaning Pokemon Box and now with Pokemon Home, My Pokemon Ranch is quite unique because it was actually a full-fledged game, and events and things would happen based on the Pokemon you deposited in the ranch. and you could also get rewards. Like I believe you could get Mew back in the day, depending on how many Pokemon you deposited within the ranch. So there are a lot of dependencies on these handheld games in order for these various console games to function. So I really do hope this is cleared up in the future, because you're going to get various situations in which these games are coming out incomplete or semi-broken as they're added to the surface, which I think that's kind of a shame based on how interesting and how easy it will be now to access this functionality, seeing as how with the new age of all these things being on an online service, seeing as how now you don't have to spend hundreds of dollars on all this added hardware. You don't need multiple consoles, you don't need peripherals for transferring, and you don't need multiple games. You just need this one singular service. It's just a simple transfer, click over type of deal. So yeah, I do hope this gets rectified moving forward. But with that being said, stay rosy.